a question. Do you ever feel like a frog? As I have it, frogs feel slow, low, ugly, puffy, drooped, pooped. The frog feeling comes when you want to be bright but feel dull, when you want to share but are selfish, when you want to be thankful but carry resentment, when you want to care but are tired and indifferent. At one time or another, I'd venture, in some way or another, each one of us can relate. I've carried some of those frog feelings floating as on a lily pad down the great river of life, weary and disgruntled, but sometimes just too froggish to budge. A story says that once upon a time, there was a frog. Well, he wasn't really a frog. He was a handsome prince who looked and croaked like a frog because a wicked witch had cast a spell on him, and only the kiss of a beautiful maiden could release him. But since when do cute chicks kiss frogs? So there he sat, handsome prince in frog form. But you know, miracles do happen. One day, the requisite maiden did come along, and before he could say warts and all, for some reason, picked him up and laid one on, and wouldn't you know it, boof, bam, zap. There he stood, handsome prince. Malcolm liked that part. And you know the rest. Which leads me to say, what is one responsibility of the church? To kiss frogs, of course. And silly as it may seem, I conclude Jesus would agree. He says as much there in Bethany. The focus, of course, is on the amazing fact of resurrection, which is why the text pops out in Eastertide. The amazing fact is on resurrection. But with those looking on, we're invited to ponder. First of all, ponder the presentation that what is impossible has yet occurred. Jesus, who had said, I am the resurrection, proves himself so by, in effect, breathing new life back into this deceased man, new life, resurrection. But there's something more, something else here, something, well, we may not notice until we have our attention drawn to it. The miracle's really only partly done as Lazarus stands there hobbling by the entrance. More than half done, we suppose, but incomplete nonetheless. It will only be completed when those around Lazarus get involved. One of the reasons I love this story is, well, first of all, just because of what it presents, but it also suggests that we need to look deeper at the Bible messages. There's something more waiting to happen. In this case, it suggests to us what is suggested in many other places, that God's miracles don't happen by God's initiative alone. So often, others are invited to help make them real, complete them. Even when filled with new life from the Lord, Lazarus can only be fully restored with a little help from his friends. He's still wrapped up in grave clothes, a little bit like a mummy, and he can't take them off by himself. Jesus knows exactly what he's doing when he says to those around Lazarus, I love the way the King James puts it, you loose him and set him free. Loose him and set him free. Well, one of the implications, one of the messages actually is not a bad one for a church in a transition time, and it's life between one installed pastor and moving toward another installed pastor. It doesn't hurt to stop and to remember in the broadest sense that there are many ways in which you, especially you, strong and solid as the Hamilton Square Presbyterian Church, you know how to be church. Sure. But for all that, there are always little subtle things happening, little ways the world is changing, little ways in which the church needs to want to think about who it is, how it's going to do things. We need to be involved in this process of God infusing life into the church, keeping it going. In this very scene, we witness two aspects of God's plan for us. The first being that awakening, the new faith and all that implies, new life. And then, if we stop to look, we also witness the imperative toward communal commitment. Now, Paul tends to specialize in these things. We hear a lot about this when we read Paul, but lo and behold, it's also implanted quietly into the gospel stories. God brings new life out of the old. The promise of the gospel is there. Then God depends on us to help one another remove whatever old grave clothes may be hanging on, habits, attitudes, traditions, whatever it may be, forming new wineskins to hold the new wine that God's making year by year. Lazarus, come forth. Resurrection. Now you all loose him and set him free so that he can embrace the new life. Curiously, the church in the Middle Ages seemed to be aware of this fact. They didn't talk about it this way, but they were aware. You saw it when monks wrote about and practiced what they called the care of souls. It worked like this. When a new initiate came to embrace that way of life, to claim Christ as Lord and Savior and focus all of life on that, the person was welcomed and then sent to study under an older and wiser brother, a spiritual advisor, so that all aspects of the new initiate's life were checked: diet, reading, conversation, devotions, even sleeping. They recognized that Jesus came to make life whole, but that we really do need help from one another. Individual focus to make it real and personal. They recognized that, well, as we heard from Genesis, we were made for each other. God looked down at the first creature and said, it's not good that this man should be alone. I need to make a helper fit for him. We were made for each other. Christ's promise of new life is tied to his command that we help one another to share it. Because the fact of the matter is, unless I'm mistaken, in some way or another, we all have a bit of those grave clothes hanging on. It's tough not to. It's a part of being human. We're all a little like Lazarus. I see him there on the cover, and as I looked at him, for some reason came to mind a scene from that old movie about Houdini. The time when he volunteered to strap himself in, to be strapped into a straitjacket. And there he was, sweating it out for, well, I think it was about 15 television minutes, trying to get himself loose. I'm telling you, it was tension building. And, of course, he knew the trick. He knew how to do it. But I thought to myself, gosh, I sure wish I had somebody with the key, because otherwise I'd be there forever. We need one another when we find ourselves boxed in to the froggish feelings, wanting to be bright, feeling dull, wanting to share, but feeling insecure, wanting to care, but tired and indifferent, wanting to try, but being bound in by failure, wanting to reach out, but fearing rejection. A bit of that Lazarus within us. And unless you're one of those rare individuals who are boldly self-affirming, self-satisfied, and self-assured, there are some of those. Of course, even then, there is a potential downside. The psychologists call it narcissism. We want to watch that stuff. Mostly, I hope you're one of those who say, I really do need help with those grave clothes-ish kind of things that bind me in. As people, we need it. As congregations, we need to share it. Calder's reminder today of the partnership that the congregation has with Arm in Arm is evidence. If you listened, it didn't take much imagining to see the clientele that mostly comes, whose lives are bound in by so many things, need help to set them free, set them anew. One of the things that impressed me from the start when I joined you was the fact that there are, on many an evening in this church building, recovery groups at work. Curiously, people notice. I happen to be over at the dollar store making a purchase for one of our church activities, and I was standing in line with someone, and we struck up a brief conversation. "Oh, you live around here?" And I said, "Well, no, actually, I work down at that church on Nottingham Way." She said, "Oh, the Presbyterian Church?" I said, "Yeah, that's the one." She said, "I know about them. They do wonderful things. They sponsor all kinds of recovery groups. They know about you." It's a wonderful thing. People whose lives have been bound in, quietly helping them unfold, unpack. You know, you get to thinking about these things and stories jump out. I have a habit of going once a week to our PCUSA website, and there are stories told there on the Presbyterian Mission page. One of them was held up by a guy named Chip Hardwick. I've known Chip through the years, a fellow clergy in leadership in high places in our denomination. He said, asked the question, "How caring is your congregation?" And he told a story in the context of the question, having found that one of his colleagues, a female pastor, had slipped into a period of anxiety and tension, which led to depression and was disabilitating for a while. And she reported that her parents and her husband were there to help her and the medical personnel and her congregation, she said. They told her to take care of herself, get on her feet, come back when she could. No judgment, no drama, only love, she reported. No judgment, no drama, only love, Chip Hardwick repeated. He said, "That sounds like the formula for a healthy congregation to me." And I see heads nodding because you know how it works. It is the formula for a healthy congregation. We want to keep it coming in the ways you've always done, and maybe in some new ways, which we'll begin to explore together in this transition time. Because there are grave clothes aplenty. We wear them, others wear them, and it's not a bad thing every once in a while to stop and recognize that God recognizes that, and God invites us to help one another unpack. But sometimes we're not so sure. Martha in the gospel, you heard it, wasn't so sure. She was aware that Lazarus had been in the tomb for 4 days. Surely there must have been an odor, or as the King James Version so graphically states it, "Lord, he'll stinketh." It's interesting, actually, to note that the gospel mentions specifically 4 days. Jewish belief of the time held that the soul of the body might hover around for 3 days, but finally depart on the 4th when the body had decayed beyond recognition. Perhaps Martha's dismay reflects her hesitation to get involved with that kind of a mess. In effect, loose him was like saying, kiss a frog. But Jesus said it to them, and he says it to us too. And what about us? What about those parts of us which have grown flat for 4 hours or 4 days or 4 months? It can happen, it can. Our early hopes, our one-time dreams. Should we leave them closeted and sealed up in that place to which they fled? Or is it possible that with the right people, right context, right time, right fellowship and support, just maybe we could revive those parts of us which lie dormant? It could get messy. Yeah, it could. It could also get healed. Jesus rightly promises in the gospel, "I am the resurrection. Lazarus, come out." And then he finishes, "You all, loose him and set him free." Amen.